Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. My name is Sarah Traver. I'm the director of Traver Gallery here in Seattle. And it's my pleasure to be here with Preston Singletary. And we're going to walk through his new show, Between Here and the Spirit World. Couple little housekeeping things before we get started. If everybody could just turn off their mics, put yourself on mute, and you can go ahead and turn off your video for this portion of this. We're going to actually walk through the exhibition together. Preston and I will talk about the works in the show, talk about the inspiration, and then at about 15 minutes before we end, we'll switch over and we'll join you all so we can see you on camera and let you ask questions of Preston and me. I'm sure you'll mostly want to talk to Preston, but anyway, so we'll get started now. I'll give you a second to just switch over. All right. Preston, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
It is a pleasure to have another of your exhibitions in the gallery, and it feels particularly special to have it be concurrent with the Smithsonian show that's up right now.
Yes, there's Raven in the Box of Daylight is at the National Museum of the American Indian through end of January next year. So if anybody's out in DC, should check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to be out there in May. So really
that's
exciting.
when the public programming is going to be happening and the members reception and all that. So the first weekend of May, I'll be there if anybody else happens to be there too.
Awesome. If you have questions as we're walking through the exhibition about particular pieces, you're welcome to drop those in the chat and we'll address them at the end of the program. So anyway, let's get back to it.
Okay.
So we have the privilege of showing your work in the gallery every April. And every year you put together a really beautiful body of work. And generally there's kind of a story behind that work. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Well, this was kind of, last year was, kind of a tribute to my father. And then as I don't know if you've read anything of on the webpage, but I lost a mentor, Benjamin Moore, who is really a close friend of mine. And instead of kind of going down that path of doing a whole thing around him, I decided to kind of allude to that and kind of talk, just the things I've been reflecting on, in terms of the, the thought process of making work and what have you. In Tlingit culture, it's very common to make objects that commemorate a moment or would be something that would be making light of something, a story or whatever. So in some cases I used a goose form, in the show because Benjamin was a goose hunter. And so it's just this. So some of the titles kind of tie into a little bit of my thought process in terms of these kind of poetic titles that I've come up with, and so really they're just left up to the viewer to kind of interpret them as well.
Yeah,
it kind of goes both ways.
Well, let's walk in and see some of the work in the show. Maybe start with this beautiful piece here. So this is one of your bust forms that you've been developing in sort of recent years.
Yeah.
But so, I was going to say this one has a little bit of a different style to it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with, the one thing I think is really interesting is the gradation of color. I've been trying to change the color theme a little bit, so it kind of fades from a purple to a blue. And then there's this other kind of different purple hue on the top. So it just has, a little bit of a kind of a new color application. And of course, it's, it's very non-traditional in the form, but it is like almost like a blanket wrapped around this guy here. And I titled it, "I Have Not Slept." I was just kind of reflecting on the, I don't know, the anxiety and stresses that we've all been going through in terms of, this pandemic and things that I've been thinking about as I, go to work and try to make new things. And so this weave pattern on the back that you're seeing is kind of turned out to be pretty beautiful. So the folks that I work with, they're helping me with details of this. And so there's Dawn McCord. She's the one, she does all the weaving and application of the tape for me. And so she helps me with those details.
Can you talk a little bit about the design on the front? So there's actually two different birds here.
Yeah.
And they have a slightly different, the feather pattern and things are different.
This is the eagle and the raven. So the eagle has more of a hook beak, and then the raven has a straighter beak. So oftentimes in Tlingit, modern Tlingit imagery, you see the eagle and the raven depicted together. And it kind of represents the two sides of the tribe, the moiety. So you're born into your mother's side, and my mother comes from the eagle moiety. So by tribal law, you would marry over to the other side as the raven. And by showing them together, it wasn't that way traditionally, but now it's kind of like showing the balance. So it's being a little more politically correct,
right?
So you don't highlight one over the other.
Exactly.
But of course, we all know that they're equal in their own ways. So
that's cool. How about these wall pieces? This is sort of a new form that you've been working on recently.
Yeah, those are again playing with my love of modernism, and I was just thinking of these forms as these almost like a mussel shell, and but then the wall format was something that I've always played with as well. And so these pieces are really just about the way that these elements flow together, how they there's kind of a puzzle like effect, and then you're sort of filling the entire space with design, and in the various ways of in context of the architect or the architecture of the design style.
Right.
So,
can you just for folks who are maybe less familiar with the formline design, can you talk a little bit about what some of those elements are, because they are repeated throughout your work?
Right. So this form here is really this is called an ovoid, but it also contains this eye. So there's this inner ovoid that that creates like an eyeball, so to speak, and then this U form here often shapes what is commonly thought of as an ear. But so these elements just continue to flow in a methodical way. You've got these, it's kind of a golden ratio, the way that I look at it. So these U forms here, this is basically a U form, and this is called a trigon. This kind of breaks up the space in a methodical way. And you can look at it as the ovoid, the U form. The U form extends down to here. It maybe even extends all the way down to here. So it's just breaking up the space in a methodical way, and that's what really makes it true to the Northwest Coast form for the form line.
Yeah. How about this? So this is kind of a nice pairing here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this piece is based on a bear's tooth, amulet that, of course, exaggerated in scale, so it becomes more of a sculptural form. And it's a format that I tend to like to work with in different ways and bring different details into the form itself. So if you're thinking of an actual bear's tooth, this is kind of like the area, that would be back behind the gums, and I've kind of converted it into like an amulet shape that would be, because of the hole. And so traditionally, maybe you would have a bear's tooth that would be worn as a pendant. Like the one that I have here is a claw, but this has been cast in glass. So these amulet forms are something that I like to play with, that format, because it's a nice sculptural representation.
And traditionally, with those amulets, are those amulets worn to, bring good luck or?
They're like talisman. They're sometimes they have significant meaning, or it can be like, kind of a protection, or or illustrate some kind of a, and I think the old archaic ones that were originally, that are only found in museums, or actually made for a specific, it could have pertained to some kind of vision that a shaman would have had, and it maybe illustrates their powers of connecting to the natural world. Yeah.
And then here's the goose.
Here's the goose. Yeah, there's sort of an homage to the, Benny was hunted waterfowl. That was he took it pretty seriously. He had a hunting club that he ran and would hunt, 3 and 4 months out of the year, and getting prepared and getting members and taking people out on guided hunts and what have you. So I thought, like, I wanted to play with this kind of naturalistic, the beak kind of looks like a Canadian goose. As best I could. It's the first time I've tried to make that kind of naturalistic detail on a bird form that way.
They're wonderful. And then there's another sort of goose head in this piece here.
Yeah.
And maybe this is a nice time, Preston, to just talk a little bit about who Benny was to you and what that connection is.
Yeah. So Benny hired me as a glass blower on his team in 1988, I think, 87, 88. And I worked on his team for over 20 years. He was a great supporter, and we became really good friends. And so I had the good, and I just found myself in the company of this amazing man who was the artistic director of Pilchuck, and he was Dale Chihuly's right-hand man for many years. And so in turn, I was able to work with him. He developed this, or he established this glass studio that lots of people came to work at. It was people like Dan Daly and Rich Royal and Dante Marioni and all of these people that I got to work with. And it's basically how I learned to blow glass, through practical experience and working with all these great artists and learning techniques and, getting insight to different kinds of approaches to glass making. And, so we always, after, 20 years of working together all the time, we were really, really close, and he was just always very nurturing to, especially me and Dante. He always would sing our praises, and he was like another father to me. Honestly, he was really a special guy, and he has such a role in the legacy of the glassmaking, in America. And his, he traveled. He had, was big conduit to the European glassmakers coming to America, coming to Pilchuck. Lino in particular, to bringing the Italians over as the artistic director at Pilchuck. And so he really changed the face of the whole glass world as we know it in the States, and it really grew from there.
Yeah.
So I was the good beneficiary of working around all these great people, and so yeah, he's dearly missed.
Yeah.
Yep.
He was an amazing man, and I think you're right. The studio glass movement wouldn't be here, arguably, or
Yeah.
certainly wouldn't be what it is without.
Yeah. I mean, he had traveled and was trying to do design work in Europe, and then he became the artistic director of the school. And through those connections, he brought a lot of people from Europe and around the world. So that was really his vision, around Pilchuck. I mean, of course, it was collaborations with Dale Chihuly, but Benjamin had a huge hand in that in the early days.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
You want to share? This is actually a pretty interesting piece here with the two heads, two bird heads.
Yeah, I called this, I called it symbiotic relationship. It was just like these two bird figures coming together, playing with this new sculptural style of, this is a pre-made form that I conjoined together with another bubble. And I was just kind of thinking about these, again, amulet forms that have these kind of really crazy anthropomorphic scenes going on in them. And so you've got this figure here with, this is actually a bear form. So it's kind of a female bear looking form. And a lot of these things they just kind of come to me, and when I'm drawing them out, and I can assign certain themes or meanings to them. But this is what I thought of, these birds kind of living within a symbiotic relationship.
And some of your work, this is, from your imagination, this form.
Correct.
And then some of your work, like the one next to it here, is based on a very sort of traditional rattle form, right?
Yeah. So this is an oyster catcher rattle, and this is really I don't know, sort of a style of rattle that was used by a shaman, again, for probably a healing ritual. And the things that I've read about these particular rattles, the beak, this sort of orange beak, this is the oyster catcher who, can dive into the water and catch fish. So it's thought of as having, master of two different realms, from the air into the water. It's kind of a change of worlds in that regard. And then the belly is a hawk, and so that's usually kind of a power symbol, the way I look at it. And this figure that's on the front here is a mountain goat. It's got the horns and this little tongue extending out of there. But this fellow's kind of holding on to this mountain goat, and the mountain goat again is another animal that has its own special power of being able to navigate this steep terrain of a mountain, and the sheer cliffs, and kind of like walk and dance along them. And it's also, the things I've read about it, they're thought of as being, up in the heavens, so to speak. And then the land otter, this little black figure is a land otter. So this is all, it's another shaman symbol that is a powerful spirit helper for the shaman. So this figure here, it could be a shaman just having this whole experience with all of these different spirit helpers. And again, it was just things that I've extrapolated out through reading about these rattles and doing the research, and but then presenting it here as kind of a sculpture.
It's an extraordinary piece. I love the red and the tongue here, that really strong red, and the contrast with the more natural colors.
Yeah, it's fun to work on these. They're very complicated in terms of making, the head and the body and this otter, land otter here, and then blowing this whole form, and then bringing these back up to temperature and picking them up out of a kiln, and then attaching them to the sculpture. And then if that wasn't enough, then I have to like, do all this design work here. Well, this thing is really precarious and kind of fragile. But then it's mounted onto this steel handle that presents the piece like a sculpture.
Can you talk a little bit about this piece over here? It's called Raven's Eye, and it's moving in a little bit of a different direction using the clear glass for the optical effect.
Yeah, this was, just thinking about glass blowing techniques. This is kind of a interesting way of creating this window. It involves, sticking a clear, bit onto the bottom of a bubble, and then switching the axis of the form, was just really a glass blowing technique. And it's, I've seen Lino use this technique, and I've never really exploited it to any degree. So but I was thinking compositionally, it would be kind of fun to see like through this window and play with the juxtaposition of the, the opaque, the transparent, and this window looking in there. And so I called it, Raven's Eye, the idea that, you asked me about a statement for this piece, and I called it a kind of a signal to some of the things I've been thinking about in terms of Raven stories, because the old, having just finished the Raven story, Raven in the Box of Daylight, and having it be in a museum show that explores the mythology of Raven, then this is kind of prompted me to start to question, like, well, what else did Raven do after he brought sun to the world and stole the water? And, so all of these stories are very well known, but they're, at some point they kind of they stop, So when is the next Raven story going to be allowed into the annals of history, or did Raven just stop doing things? Presumably he, if the culture had not been, interrupted, and new stories would have continued to emerge, and so part of my question is like, what are those stories? And so that's kind of what I'm starting to think about a little bit.
That's an interesting, it's an interesting question to just sort of explore and imagine, but it's also sort of socially an interesting question to think about, like who are the storytellers for the Tlingit people, and and who's bringing those stories to light, and how does that continue to change and develop?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that it could have been Raven who discovered, the boarding school, children. It could be like Raven's thinking about climate change. What's he going to do about it? There's things like that. So, I mean, we can imagine all kinds of things that Raven may be trying to affect. Because Raven is not the creator in mythology. He didn't create the world, but he brought order to the world. So he kind of helped enable things to occur for the benefit of mankind. So that's that's how I like to think of Raven.
Are there people who are working on these stories that you know of? And, I mean, I think you are.
I think, well, yeah, I mean, I have some of my, colleagues and friends, like Gene Tagaban, for instance. He's a guy that I play music with and have collaborated with for a long time. He is a writer, and he's the Raven dancer. He's got this big Raven headdress and these big wings and stuff. So he's really kind of personifies Raven, for the for his his family or his clan. And so we've been talking about it a lot more recently, like what, and he's been writing some stories. So we might try to collaborate on a few things, and maybe musically or maybe theatrically, but I'm sure it'll find its way into the artwork next. Yeah.
Can't wait. How about this piece? I think, again, sort of referencing your interest in modernism.
Yeah, this again, is sort of an homage to Calder, of course, and that whole idea of the modernist connection to indigenous art, and which led to the genre of primitivism. And so when I was learning, since I didn't go to art school, I started to read and look at things that interested me, and everything from surrealism to modernism and primitivism. Primitivism was a genre of the modernists that were reflecting on indigenous cultures, and in some cases appropriating it. Picasso and Henry Moore and Giacometti and all these artists. And I think that there was like something going on there, that they were genuinely inspired by what they were seeing, but it was also trying to unlearn the confines of Western art, education that they would have had, and accepting these influences and allowing them to come into their work. And so when I look at their work, I see the same thing, and I kind of question, and I like to borrow and kind of regenerate new ideas. Yeah, so I was trying to think of, is that a genre? I don't know, but there's a lot of native artists that do talk about this primitivism issue and things like that. So
Sure.
it's because native art has been largely excluded from the modern art world. It hasn't been celebrated in the same way that other artists are can create and thrive and what have you. So this is something that that we're all aware of.
Yeah, or if it is, celebrated or documented in sort of historical texts, it tends to be almost in an anthropological sense, not about
Right.
the individual artist or the creator, or the
Right.
particular
Right.
artwork.
Yeah, and they attach such a deep meaning to the objects that were made by the indigenous people, because it was the communities made these objects to express man's connection to the cosmos, so to speak. And what I've read in this great primitivism catalog, and they talked about how the modernists felt that their work was disempowered because it was created for gallery commerce, and that was different than what the indigenous arts were, what their intent was. And so I think, and then you get into this whole idea of surrealism and the whole psychoanalysis of the artwork and the symbolism behind all of that. And that becomes really fascinating for me. And so in some cases, I try to, think about that as a jump off point. Like, okay, how can I make something, a little bit new and, put a different spin on my work and how I work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this piece, just details on here. I just wanted to point out there's some really beautiful elements.
Yeah.
In the making of this piece. You have this incredible, almost like wood grain texture on here.
Yep. And there's it's kind of like a little spirit face, ghost face there. We've got the bear on the back side, and then there's a kind of a human figure here, and then the land otters again. So shining down was the idea of this kind of the light coming down on this form, and the interaction of the branches and these little moons or suns or whatever they want it to be.
And again, I think it's such a good example of how you use the glass to its greatest ability, like bringing in transparency here, and then using these as little, they're little lenses. They reflect everything in the entire room. It's really, they're kind of magical.
Yeah, I love working with this format, and I love the idea of these mobiles, and the Calder is just a really big influence for me. I mean, in terms of inspiration, and so this is quite literally, obviously, Calder was one of the ones that really popularized the mobile itself. So kind of giving a little credit there too.
Yeah. Well, I think we have a couple more minutes, and there's a few other pieces that we should definitely take a look at in here.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about these ones, which are sort of a very different color palette.
Yeah,
Really
yeah.
fun to see move in that direction, very non-traditional.
Well, this one I called Soul Flight. This is kind of a wing design, if you look at it this way. And so I was kind of looking for the coloration of a goose wing. And so in some light, a goose has this almost mauve sort of, purplish color to them in the right light. And so I was looking for that color, trying to find new colors to work with. And so the whole idea of, again, Benjamin being a goose hunter, and maybe that's him kind of, having being on a goose wing and flying into the next world, or whatever. This one I called Will Not Disappear. I guess this is, again, the idea that, this figure is, trying to remain visible. And the whole idea that Benjamin's gone, and it's really hard for me to believe that he's not here anymore, because he was so vital and he wasn't that old. And so I, anyway, made that kind of as an homage and a poetic statement, about him.
One of the things I so love about your work, Preston, is that each piece is clearly very personal to you and has a personal story, but the way that they also are very approachable universally. So, I see that piece, and the title Will Not Disappear in that form of that teardrop, and it calls to mind people I've lost in my life.
Yep.
It feels very wonderful that it can occupy both of those spaces and be really sort of powerful sort of talisman to anybody who takes it home with them and gets to look at it.
That's right. I mean, I would like, I always said when early ruminations of like, okay, how do I sum up what I am and what I do? And I always said for the longest time that I wish that the work could be appreciated for, something other than ethnic art, but it's the same time, it's what gives it its power, in terms, it has this connection, at least in the graphic style, to, the ancient designs and this concepts around, what I'm trying to make these things, and why, or how I make them and why I make them. So, in any case, it's something that it's fun to play with that notion a little bit and kind of go, slip back and forth.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
This piece is really different in that it's sort of pictorial style.
Yeah.
Kind of moves away from the form line design.
Yeah, so this is, again, this is one I call genetic memories. So this guy's got something going on in his brain here. and then, this connection to nature, and I again, playing it, it's almost like a surrealist kind of approach, or, using that as an inspiration. These are mother of pearl buttons, and that kind of shows that he's wearing this robe, but then the inside of this robe, inside of his chest, is the nature, and kind of bringing me back to that awareness of nature. And again, the weaving design here, coming all the way into the back, has got the killer whale, which is a symbol of my clan symbol. And here this little plume that's coming out of the blowhole is like the vapor that is blown as the whale breaches the surface of the water, and often this little cloud of mist comes out, and it's sometimes thought of as a kind of a spirit, that's coming, the spirit of the whale. And then you have these wolves that are actually, these are wolf designs here. And, you know, so sometimes they're just really what seems appropriate. It doesn't mean that the wolf is, you know, anything in particular, but other than just there being a wolf. You know, Joe David and I always talk about, you know, everything in native art, everything has to have a meaning, and everything has to be like, well, what is this here? And what does this mean? This little thing, you know, and Joe would be, you know, often would say, well, this design is wonderfully non-representational, you know, because not everything has, you know, a very specific purpose. And sometimes it just adding a little bit of flair to, you know, create the design.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Preston. I think we should probably get off camera here and go on camera in the other room and join people for questions. All right. I am going to go into a view where we can see everybody. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Gosh, good turnout today. I'm going to go ahead and read some of the questions on here that were in the chat, and then we'll have you guys join in and see if you want to ask questions as well. So Judith Cushman asks, can you talk about your evolving mission as an artist, and do you see yourself continuing to educate and explore your heritage? Your work evolves and becomes more complex. I wonder what you hope your work inspires in us.
Well, you know, I am always deepening my connection to the tribal community. I'm working, I'm on an arts committee for the Sea Alaska Heritage Incorporated, and their mission is to help perpetuate the art, the history, art in all its forms, the language, and everything. And this is, so they're building a campus up in Juneau, Alaska. So these are things that are really exciting to be involved with because we're kind of shaping what the education around the culture can be. So the answer is yes. I mean, I'm always thinking about, you know, new and, you know, what do I want to do next? And that is involving a little bit of public art. It's, you know, kind of playing music and bringing my culture into the music, thinking about potential theater productions, and which we'll see. It's another big task to try to tackle. But then, yeah, and then on an ongoing basis, you know, I've got lots of ideas about new shows, new museum shows, because, you know, now they have one up at the Smithsonian. It's kind of begs the question, like, well, how many more of these shows do I have in my, you know, in my belt, under my belt, you know? So hopefully those ideas will find some traction and start to flow.
Richard Wortley asks to hear a little bit about the blue piece on the wall near the Calder piece. Rich, is that a pedestal? It's a wall-mounted piece or a pedestal piece? Okay, well, we'll wait for Rich to chime in on chat and get clarification on that, and I can run and get it. In the meantime, Terry says, I've been following you for many years. I love your art form and so appreciate the opportunity to view your work. Thank you so much. Oh, is the documentary in the works?
Yes, there's a documentary that's being made. Well, two of them actually. One's about the music and one's about the art. So they're kind of companion pieces, but they're being worked on by Heartstone Productions. They've been video filmmakers that have been they've been following me around for maybe 10 years. And slowly watching my hair turn gray. This is the piece. We're going to just show it. This one here.
I think this is the one that
I
Rich
think
is
that
asking
this is
about.
maybe the one. So this is inspired really by a small. It's smaller in form, but it's a shaquillette, which is like a frontlet, and so it's exaggerated in its scale, but be something that be worn on the forehead. This piece is, it's called The Man Who Goes Before. It's kind of like the leader of the group, somebody who's, so this is a kind of a human form here, and that would be, the idea of this leader of the clan.
Are these, sorry, Preston, are these elements, these are inlaid?
Yeah, you can't see them really, but they are iridescent glass inlays. So these are been we carved a little depression in the form, and then these were inlaid. So they're pretty a lot of work, but they traditionally would have been abalone. But so in this case, I used the iridescent glass.
Sorry about the siren, everyone. Any other questions before we jump off? All right. Well, Preston, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to walk through these exhibitions with you and to share your process and your inspiration with everybody. And thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you soon.